Welcome back to Hardball. Former Vice President Dick Cheney is writing his memoirs, and the Washington Post reports that the one-time master of secrecy will reveal his grievances with his boss, former President George W. Bush, and detail their heated arguments in full. Someone who attended a recent Cheney gathering described Cheney's disappointment with Bush and said, in the second term, Cheney felt Bush was moving away from him. He said Bush was shackled by the public reaction and the criticism he took. Bush was more malleable to that. The implication was that Bush had gone soft on him, or rather Bush had hardened against Cheney's advice. He'd showed an independence that Cheney didn't see coming. Tom DeFrank is the Washington bureau chief of the New York Daily News, and Pat Buchanan is an MSNBC political analyst. Tom DeFrank, what do we make of this? Is Dick Cheney ready to violate his omerta, his blood oath of silence?
Well, I think he is up to a point. I guess I think that he's going to show a little leg. He's certainly going to deal with the differences between himself and President Bush, especially in the second term. But I suspect that Cheney is not going to be particularly personal about his view of President Bush. I was in contact this afternoon with somebody who's very familiar with both the book and Cheney's view, and I'm told that the Washington Post story in this view distorts both Cheney's view of President Bush and what he intends to do in the book. We'll just have to see.
Pat Buchanan, you're a veteran of the Nixon White House, where a lot of books came in the aftermath of that administration, with a lot of backstabbing in those books. Does this surprise you that Cheney might join that crowd of backstabbers who write memoirs revealing all the secrets after he leaves the White House?
I don't believe Dick Cheney will engage in backstabbing. I do believe this, Lawrence, that Cheney does feel, I think, that the Bush administration or the president himself had sort of a lapse of faith in his earlier axis of evil policies, that he put Rumsfeld over the side, who was Dick Cheney's mentor and friend, in a way that was really reduced Rumsfeld to a level that Cheney felt was insulting. I think he felt that the president did not move against North Korea and Iran as toughly as he should have in those final 2 years. And, of course, you've got the Scooter Libby pardon that did not happen. But I agree with Tom that Cheney is not going to get personal and small here. I think he's going to defend his record as the most powerful, influential vice president in history. He's going to say we did the right thing, we should have been stronger at the end. And he's going to establish a separate identity from George W. Bush, and I think probably he's doing the right thing for himself.
All right, let's consider this excerpt from the Washington Post story. When the president made decisions that I didn't agree with, I still supported him and didn't go out and undercut him, Cheney said, according to Stephen Hayes, his authorized biographer. Now we're talking about after we've left office, I have strong feelings about what happened, and I don't have any reason not to forthrightly express those views. Pat Buchanan, doesn't he actually still have a reason not to express those views?
No, I disagree. I think George W. Bush is being very fatalistic. He talks about in 50 years, history may, we're going to decide what my presidency is like. Cheney sees this as being put in ice as a failed presidency. And let me give you an example. I don't know what Cheney's position was, but my guess would be he would like to have unleashed the Israelis on Iran, or have gone himself, had the United States take out those nuclear facilities. Now, if he's got a very strong position, he felt that was the right position, and it was vetoed by the president, you follow the president when you're in there. But when you leave and write your memoirs, Lawrence, I think it's fair to say this is what I thought should be done, and here's what I said.
Tom DeFrank, doesn't the loyalty extend to history? Doesn't it extend to the time after office?
Well, up to a point, I would say, Lawrence. And, of course, I think the Bush clan would say that. I mean, the Bush clan...
How's the Bush clan going to react to this?
Well, the Bush clan, as you well know, prides loyalty over every other factor, over competence, over everything else. And so unless this is a big distortion of where Cheney really is going to be, I think the Bush people will think this is an act of disloyalty. On the other hand, one thing that resonated with me about this story was something that happened to me that is very similar to an incident in this story, where Cheney years ago, maybe 25 years ago, said to me he would never write a book because you've got to be willing to, there's got to be one guy around a president who shuts up and keeps his mouth shut. Now, why has he changed his mind? I suspect it's because he believes very strongly in certain things, and he clearly was overruled a fair amount in the second term, and I think he has decided for his own sake and for history's sake that he's going to lay out some of that. But I don't believe he's going to beat up the President Bush. that would probably, as Nixon said, it would be wrong.
Pat Buchanan, you've crossed the Bush family. You had the audacity to run against the first President Bush for president. How did that feel? You're still alive, it seems. You seem you're okay.
Well, we got a pretty rough going over, but when you take on the President of the United States, as I've often said, people say you can't fight City Hall, try overthrowing the government of the United States. So you expect that, but let me say on a personal level, as Tom did, I'm very loyal, and I like Richard Nixon. He was like a father to me, but if I wrote my memoirs, which I intend to do, I would have no hesitancy in saying, that I urged him to, do the bombing on North Vietnam in 1969, that I thought he should have vetoed this bill, and he didn't do it. I think you can do that and be respectful and say, the President of the United States, you serve him loyally, but you got a right, I think, to write your memoirs and say where you stood on all these issues. But after the presidency's over.
Pat, why didn't you write your Nixon memoir in the 70s when it was hot? I mean, if you're doing Nixon memoir, it's going to come out over 40 years later after the president is dead. It seems to me there's a big difference between that and what Cheney's doing.
Well, I think you're right. But look, I was not 68 years old then. I was about 34 or 35 when I left the administration. And Cheney, let's face it, Cheney's had a heart condition. He's got a tremendous reputation in history as the most, controversial vice president, most powerful, influential. I almost think, Lawrence, he's got an obligation to lay out why he did what he did. I mean, he's been out there out front on the torture issue, as they call it. He confronted the President of the United States, Obama, on that. And I think what he's saying is, look, if Mr. Bush wants to go out there and, let history be the judge, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make the case for what I said and did because I believe it was right, and I believe it is still the right thing to do in the interest of the national security. And truth be told, Cheney has, if you talk national security, I think Dick Cheney still has great credibility with tens of millions of Americans on that issue.
All right. I think I smell book hype here. I'm not too excited. I have a feeling there's going to be less than we want in this book. Thank you, Tom DeFrank. Thank you, Pat Buchanan.